He conquered half the world and made himself a god. Then the men he trusted most surrounded him with knives. This is Julius Caesar. A hand slid a hidden blade from beneath a senator's robe. At the heart of Rome, the most powerful man alive smiled, surrounded by friends. He suspected nothing. These were men he had pardoned, promoted, and loved, now closing around him with murder in their eyes. The first blade struck from behind. Caesar spun in shock, and suddenly every face he trusted turned against him at once. Dozens of daggers rose together. The ruler of the Roman world stood trapped, hemmed in on every side by his own Senate. Then he saw him, the young man he had loved like a son, blade in hand. Something broke, and he covered his face and fell. He was born into an old noble family in Rome, proud but far from rich. As a boy, he watched power move through his father's house. Then his father was suddenly gone. At just 16, he became the head of the family, the weight of a great name pressing down on him. These were dangerous years. Rome's dictator marked the young man as an enemy, and he was forced to flee through the dark streets, hunted but unbroken. At sea, pirates seized him. Even in chains, he stayed proud, laughing that once freed he would return and destroy every last one of them. He kept that promise. He came back with ships and soldiers, and the men who had mocked him knelt bound at his feet, at his mercy. Back in Rome, his true weapon was his voice. He seized the hearts of the people, climbing toward power on their roaring devotion. To win them, he staged lavish games and feasts, buying the love of the mob, and sinking himself into crushing, ruinous debt. In secret, he bound himself to the two most powerful men in Rome, its richest citizen and its greatest general, carving the republic between the three of them. That deal handed him Gaul. At the head of iron legions, he marched north into a war that would make his name immortal. For 8 brutal years, he crushed the fierce Gaulish tribes, tribe by tribe, in a storm of iron, mud, and blood. At Alesia, their greatest chief laid his sword at Caesar's feet. An entire people had been conquered by one man's will. The cost was staggering. 1 million dead, 1 million more dragged away in chains, and Caesar returned the richest, most feared man alive. In Rome, the Senate watched in terror. His glory had grown so vast that many now saw him as a mortal threat. Then the pact shattered. His rich ally fell in a distant war, and his old friend the general became his deadliest rival. The Senate ordered him to disband his army and return alone. Instead, he halted at a small border river, the Rubicon. At the river's edge, he made his choice. "The die is cast," he said, and led his legions across, plunging all of Rome into civil war. Terror swept the city. Learning that Caesar was marching on Rome itself, his rival and the senators fled the capital in blind panic. On a plain in Greece, Roman killed Roman, brother against brother, as Caesar's veterans shattered the army of his old friend and former ally. Broken and defeated, the once great general fled by ship to Egypt, hoping the young pharaoh's court would shelter him from Caesar's wrath. But in Egypt, they betrayed him. When Caesar arrived, they presented him a basket, and he recoiled in horror at his rival's murder. Then, from a rolled carpet, a young queen rose before him. Cleopatra had come, and a dangerous passion ignited between them. The aging conqueror and the young queen became lovers, binding Rome and Egypt together in one of history's most fateful affairs. War erupted in Alexandria, flames devouring the streets. When it ended, Caesar had placed Cleopatra firmly upon the Egyptian throne. She bore him a son named Caesarion, and for a rare moment, the hard, ruthless face of the aging conqueror softened at the sight of his only boy. Then he returned to Rome in a blaze of triumph, riding a golden chariot through vast roaring crowds at the absolute summit of his power and glory. The Senate crowned him with honors and named him Dictator for life, heaping statues and titles upon him until he ruled as an uncrowned king over all of Rome. 3 times a royal crown was offered to him, and 3 times he refused it before the crowd. Yet everyone whispered darkly that he truly longed to be king. In the shadows, jealous and frightened senators began to plot his downfall. Fearing a tyrant, even men that Caesar himself had pardoned now secretly sharpened their knives against him. The night before, his wife woke screaming from a terrible nightmare and clung to him, begging him to stay home. But proud and fearless, he brushed her fears aside. On his way, an old seer clutched his arm, crying out a warning of doom. Caesar only laughed and pushed him aside. He climbed the Senate steps, calm and proud. Among the columns, the conspirators waited, daggers hidden, as the trap closed around him. As Caesar entered the Senate, the conspirators closed around him, pretending to plead. Then one seized his robe, and the terrible signal was given. The first struck, and Caesar recoiled in shock. In an instant, the men he trusted turned on him from every side. They surrounded him completely, unarmed and alone, a ring of former friends pressing in with murder in their hearts. He struggled desperately to break free, horror and disbelief on his face, betrayed by the very men he had chosen to spare. Then he saw him, Brutus, the young man he had loved like a son, among his attackers. Something inside him broke. He stopped fighting, drew his robe over his head, and sank down at the foot of a statue, surrendering to his fate. It was done. The killers stood frozen, one dropping his weapon in dawning horror at the enormity of what they had committed. They rushed out to be hailed as liberators, but the people met them only with silence, fear, and rising fury. Rome was stunned. The covered body of its greatest leader was carried through streets lined with silent, grieving crowds. In the Forum, Mark Antony held up the fallen leader's robe and wreath, and the people's grief exploded into a thirst for justice. The city turned on the killers, driving Brutus and Cassius out into the night as hunted outcasts, hated by all. Rome mourned as never before. Around a great pyre the people wept, for they had loved this man more than any before him. Then his will was read. He had left money to every citizen and his gardens to the people, and their love only deepened. For Caesar had lifted up the poor, fed the hungry, gave land to his soldiers and citizenship to the conquered. He raised the common man. His young heir, Octavian, swore before his statue to avenge him, cold purpose already burning in his youthful eyes. With Mark Antony, he raised an army and marched to hunt down the murderers who had dared to strike Caesar down. At Philippi, the avengers crushed the conspirators' armies in a storm of iron and dust. Justice had finally come. Alone amid the smoke of his lost battle, Brutus bowed his broken head. The betrayer had paid the ultimate price. Far away, Cleopatra learned her protector was gone, and darkness gathered over her and their young son, Caesarion. In Rome, the Senate declared Caesar a god. When a bright comet blazed above, the people saw his soul rising to the heavens. They built him a temple and worshipped him as a deity. The murdered man had become a god to all of Rome. His young heir rose to become Augustus, the first Roman emperor, and from Caesar's legacy, a mighty empire was born. His very name outlived him. For 2,000 years, rulers called themselves Caesar, Kaiser, and Tsar. One man became the word for power itself. He conquered a world, reshaped Rome forever, and fell to those he trusted. This was Julius Caesar, the man who became a legend. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more legendary stories from history's darkest and greatest figures.